Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hiwon from Climate Change Center, Korea, and welcome to the session. First of all, thank you all for taking the time in the middle of a very busy COP schedule. In this session, we would like to discuss how we can make industrial transition competitive, fair, and inclusive, especially for companies within local communities that are currently depend on high emitting industries. For sectors like steel, petrochemicals, and cement, the questions are very practical. Who pays for the transition? How do we protect jobs, competitiveness, and communities? How can finance be mobilized in a way that is credible, scalable, and fair? We hope this will be a practical and open dialogue. To start, I'd like to invite our chairman, Cher Choi, to virtually deliver his opening remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am Jason, Chairman of the Korea Climate Change Center. On behalf of my Climate Change Center and myself, I wish to welcome you all to the event on transition finance taking place at Korea Pavilion at COP30 in Pavilion. My thanks go to our speakers, Dr. Deva Saida from the OECD, and Mr. Butler from the IEA, and many other people for joining us virtually. I would also like to extend my deep thanks to our moderator, Mr. Philip Pasquini, CEO of the Climate Leadership Coalition, and all distinguished panelists for sharing their valuable perspective today. This year marks 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement, a pivotal moment in global climate governance. As a Korea's climate investor during the Paris climate negotiation, I deployed the tools that inspiring journey I built from this historic event. That experience demonstrated that ambition and perseverance truly have the power to shape our future. Global climate action has not progressed from making budget to focusing on implementation, from setting targets to driving transition. The progress of parties should become a true stage for real progress and practical transformation. Korea has communicated an ambitious 2030 visionary determined vision for NDC to the United Nations, with a target range of 53 to 61% reduction compared to 2018 levels. This action reaffirms Korea's commitment for responsible and significant carbon transition of the climate effort. In pursuit of these objectives, sectors that are difficult for development, such as steel, petrochemicals, and cement, which constitute the foundation of our economy, encounter considerable obstacles. Attaining our ambitious targets will necessitate substantial and deliberate transformation of these industries. Transition finance is essential, not simply as an investment instrument, but as a driving force in which that connects transition production. By integrating public and private capital, aligning policy objectives, and fostering domestic and international cooperation, transition finance can transform the evaluation process into tangible progress. Today's discussion centers on strengthening these functions. Is Korea's first level NGO dedicated to climate action. Climate Change Center will continue to perform practical strategies for industrial and energy transition, seeking a balance between national interest and global responsibility. We will also strive to build a resilient transition finance ecosystem, linking central and local governments, businesses, and financial institutions to enhance both social acceptance and real-world implementation. I hope today's session serves as an important stepping stone for advancing action and implementation network education. Once again, I thank you all for joining my session.
Thank you. So thank you. So now to set the stage, I'd like to invite our first speaker, Mr. Dagger Sagan, Industry Program Lead of OECD, to deliver the global transition finance trends and implications for hard-to-obey sectors. Dr. Dagger, the floor is yours.
How can I change the slides? Okay, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm from the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And we have a program that is focusing on one of the hard-to-abate sectors, so that is the industry, where transition finance is playing a key role, not only in advanced economies, but also in emerging markets and developing economies, where for steel, cement, and also petrochemicals, decarbonization quite important and also emerging. I'll try to give some examples from that. I won't take you through the details of this, but you know the industry sector, when you account for the direct and indirect emissions, but also the emissions throughout its life cycle, could go up to 40% of the total CO2 emissions. So it's a high emitting sector, and also its emissions are hard to abate for the complexity and the types of technologies that are needed, and that's why finance is quite critical. Now, looking into what we cover and where transition finance could play an important role, and actually in some of these countries like in Thailand, Indonesia, some company-specific best practices are emerging. We cover the entire technology scope from, let's say, the more traditional low-carbon technologies like energy efficiency, biomass, but also to more disruptive options like CCS, hydrogen, and electrification. Now, just to look into this one. What is important? Of all these technologies, as you know, depending on the, let's say, the reference incumbent fossil fuel-based technology, there is generally a cost gap. So the example here for hydrogen for steel sector shows that, for instance, the levelized cost of steel with hydrogen could be up to 30% more expensive than the coal-based blast furnace option. So we try to understand how that cost gap can be closed. This is one example. Yesterday I was presenting at the at one of the other pavilions, and there I looked into the biomass for plastics and for petrochemical industry. The cost gap is 100%. So there is no single solution on how to close this financing gap. There is options on the capex side, so to providing forms like viability gap fund, etc., to reduce the upfront capital costs. Looking into how the operation costs can be reduced through, for instance, targeted support for energy and raw materials through contracts for differences. Demand side measures like green premiums. This is probably something you've heard throughout the event, and also carbon markets. Now, transition finance plays one of the roles here as a financial lever to close this financial or the cost gap. We've looked into different success factors into how financing and including transition finance could help different options for different sectors. And in a couple of weeks, we'll be releasing a new financial toolkit with 15 case studies on economic de-risking and financing instruments. And if you look at this financing part, you see there are actually 2 transition finance examples that are commonly used across the different emerging markets and developing economies. And if I may briefly take you through them, one is the sustainability-linked instruments, which you also see here. Typically, it's the corporates that provide that, but obviously it comes with a very clear planning on the corporate side on how they would transition with specific carbon intensity measures, targets set, which technologies will be used, and how the financing will be coming from to decarbonize the company's operations. We see that in the cement industry, for instance, in Mexico. We see that in Thailand, in the petrochemical industry, and steel industry. In the case of India, you'll find those in the toolkit. This is one example from the IDB BBVA Colombia Sustainability Bond. This is another important one. where the funds will be expanded financing of the BBVA Green and Social Portfolio and for the financial services they are providing for the MSMEs. This is one other transition finance example that is being used not only in this case, but you can see this commonly across other jurisdictions as well. Going back to the sustainability linked bonds, probably that's relevant for the colleagues here from the industry sector like steel and petrochemicals. This is, as I mentioned, a key tool, a key transition finance tool by the corporates that can be issued to attract finance from commercial banks, but also other sources to decarbonize their industries. I'll share the slides. Please feel free to do so with everyone, and the toolkit will be up in a couple of weeks, and I'm sure it will be interesting for the colleagues here. And this complements also the broader enabling conditions that are needed for decarbonizing industry. Transition finance is one thing. You need obviously deepened capital markets and quite measures to advance the financial ecosystem as a whole. But transition finance is one of the options, as I mentioned, and it comes with other types of enabling measures or the investment conditions to be able to decarbonize the industry sector. There will be, as I understand, another presentation from my colleague at the IEA, where they released the excellent report on transition finance. So in a way, I hope this is also complementary to what my colleague from the IEA will be explaining. Thank you so much for your interest.
Thank you, Dager, for the clear overview. And as you're leaving, thank you for your speech. See you soon again. So with the foundation, let us now move to the IEA context. So our second speaker is Luca Lore, Climate and Carbon Market Leads IEA. He will share the latest update report from IEA. Please welcome Luca.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everyone. Let me see if this works. Can we put the slides? Thanks. So first of all, let me thank the Climate Change Center for inviting the IEA. Thank you. To present the result of the study on transition finance that we recently published on transition finance. And this event comes at a really timely moment because action on emission-intensive sector are really at a crucial moment, to place the world in a sustainable pathway. Investment in energy transition is essential, but the current levels remain insufficient, and this, of course, has to come in parallel to green finance. In the coming decade, alongside green investment, it will be equally important to provide financing to those hard-to-abate sectors that at the moment don't receive enough financing. This includes, for instance, aviation, steel, and many other hard-to-abate industries. Of course, this approach of transition finance allows economic activity to continue while making progress on decarbonizing and reducing emissions. And in the report which we published last month, we map the landscape for transition finance and explain why it matters, and also highlight the approaches that could help move the debate forward. We also look in the role of transition finance in key sectors. We look at steel, cement, critical minerals, and natural gas. And we also conducted a survey with financial institutions on transition finance, and we included the results on that. So I'll go very quickly on the results of the study. So in our report, we estimate that the potential volume of investment that could be supported by transition finance over the next decade is around 4 to 5 trillion. This depends on which scenario one takes into account. But of course, it's important to recognize that there is no one-size-fits-for-all, and so regional energy pathways and also precise estimates are very difficult and challenges to estimate. Importantly, this is not an exhaustive number, but it covers a wide range of hard-to-abate sectors, including natural gas, industry, buildings, transport, and critical minerals. Half of the investment, as you can see on the chart on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, would be directed to emerging markets and developing economies. And of course, it's important that we'll see later that this investment is also supported by clear and credible transition strategies. So even with these caveats, the 4 to 5 trillion over 10 years is roughly 500 billion annually. This is comparable to the size of today's green bond markets. And looking back, green finance has expanded 15-fold over the past decades, growing from a really modest base. So this is possible to scale it up, and achieving a similar growth, especially for an emerging market and developing economies, is going to be very important. So we looked also in the report at two key challenges to try to understand why transition finance has not been deployed to full scale today. And the two main buckets are, first, there is no clear definition, distinguished definition of what transition means, right? So it's important for us that whenever we talk about transition, there needs to be credibility, and also it needs to be the foundation of strategic planning and consistent follow-up. So having a clear transition strategy at the national level is essential, is the first key step, but it's also essential to do a follow-up with clear KPIs to ensure continuous updates. In our report, we provide sectoral insights on heavy industries, cement and steel, critical mineral, natural gas, as I said, and also recommend some KPIs to help keep track of the progress along the way. It's important also to keep in mind that transition is a long-term journey, and so it's difficult really to anticipate all the challenges that are there and that may occur in this journey. Therefore, it's important to keep momentum, and to keep this momentum, we require this follow-up. On the right-hand side, we also see that the challenge is also to expand the existing financial flow, and to do that, we need to look at inclusiveness, interoperability of transition finance, and also avoiding financial emissions, and I will discuss all of these in the next slides. So on inclusiveness, in the report we try to understand and map out the different actors and stakeholders that are included in the transition finance debate. As you can see from this chart, there are two extreme cases, the one of the left-out group at the bottom, and then the opt-out group at the top. So in many emerging economies, there are entities that have not yet developed transition strategies, not only because of maybe lack of an intent, but also due to limited capacity. And this includes sectors where emissions are particularly difficult to abate, once again, the ones that I mentioned before, but also small and mid-sized enterprises. So these would be the ones that are the left-out group. On the other side of the spectrum, the ones up, the opt-out group, include instead those entities that do have the capacity to use transition finance, but instead choose not to do so because maybe of a limited immediate need or incentives to participate. And so these are entities that currently do not perceive financial constraints or point at the fact that currently the market doesn't yet fully price the value of the transition, alignment, and the activities. So in our report, we focused precisely on these two groups, the left out and the opt out, to try to understand how we can bring these actors within the debate of transition finance. And to do so, we looked also at the size of capital markets today in advanced economies, but also in emerging market and developing economies. So what you can see here, it's also the size of the market, but also the respective cumulative energy investment over the next decade. And the second and the third column present the size of equity and bond markets. and it clearly indicates that capital markets in emerging markets and developing economies are much smaller than those in advanced economies today. However, if you look at the fourth column, this illustrates what happens in emerging markets, developing economies other than China, and is where the largest energy investment will be needed over the next decade. And this makes cross-border capital inflows really essential. And this is where transition finance can really make a difference. In our report, as I was saying, we also conducted a survey of around 20 global financial institutions, and nearly half of the banks and around 1/3 of the institutional investors that we consulted with explicitly consider both home country and host country frameworks when making financial investment decisions. And finally, if we look on the right-hand side, you can see how many of the words taxonomy exist today. And they exist mostly in emerging market and developing economies. This means that probably there is a fragmentation of these approaches, and these frameworks are generally developed to align with their pathways, the transition pathway of each of these jurisdictions and companies. So it's very important that all of these different taxonomies and frameworks, they need to advance interoperability to allow greater equivalence among themselves. The reason why the inclusion of emerging market and developing economies and also hard-to-abate sector is so important is that if we exclude these areas, they risk really to create what we call financial carbon leakage. As you can see from the chart, it's a little bit complicated, but please bear with me. There are many financial institutions that use finance emissions as one of the key performance metric, but if this indicator is applied too narrowly or it's addressed over a short-term horizon, it can only unintentionally create different incentives like encouraging institutions to reduce their finance emissions, not only by supporting decarbonization among borrower or investors, but it's simply by withdrawing finance from carbon-intensive sectors altogether. And of course, this does not contribute to the global decarbonization, and we really need to have an approach that considers also these emissions in, and so avoiding leaving them out is also essential. I would like to conclude with this slide. As I mentioned earlier, transition finance holds the potential to support 4 to 5 trillion of investment over the next decade, and however, it has not yet reached its full potential. And unlocking this potential will require both credibility and inclusiveness, as we've seen, and this calls for efforts of both policymakers and stakeholders. And to strengthen the credibility, governments really need to provide clear national level guidance, as sectoral transitions are important. It's important also to see that there is at the moment this dual tier approach where transition finance is considered as basically a second tier compared to green finance. We need to move to a narrative where transition finance and green finance are basically put on the same level. Together with green finance, transition finance can really evolve into a discipline, but at the same time, flexible tool that helps scale up global investment in decarbonization and also strengthen energy security and deliver long-lasting emission reduction. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luca. So now let's explore Korea context. Our third speaker is Ji-won Choi, Director General from Climate Change Center, who will introduce Korea's status in transition finance and key policy recommendations to connect Korea 2035 NDC goals. Ji-won, if you are ready, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jiwon Choi, Director General of the Climate Change Center Korea. The country is the first dedicated climate response NGO established in 2008. Our center works across the government, industry, finance, academia, and civil society to turn climate ambition into implementation. Today, I would like to discuss why transition finance is essential for Korea and how we can design it so that regions, firms, and citizens all move forward together. Our key question today is how can transition finance move from being a niche tool to a practical engine for industrial competitiveness, firmness, fairness, and inclusiveness? This question matters because in countries like Korea, industrial structure, the energy mix, and regional economics are tightly interconnected. If we frame the transition incorrectly, we risk slowing down both climate action and regional development. So for today's session, I will speak within the context laid out on this slide and explain why this framing is essential for designing a workable transition finance system. Globally, industry accounts for around 30% of emissions. In Korea, it is 41.3%. This is not because Korea is less committed to climate action, but because manufacturing makes up 27.6% of GDP, nearly 1.7 times the OECD average. A larger industrial base naturally produces a higher share of industrial emissions. Therefore, our question is not industry or climate, but how to protect both the climate system and industrial and regional economies simultaneously. If we neglect this framing, decarbonization can be misinterpreted as deindustrialization, risking social pushback and regional decline. Our stance is to design a transition system where climate recovery and regional futures advance together. Korea's 2035 NDC calls for a 53 to 61% reduction versus 2018. Under this pathway, the industrial sector must cut 24.3 to 31%. Three subsectors, steel, petrochemicals, cement, make up 67.3% of industrial emissions. Without decisive transition in these subsectors, national targets will simply not be achievable. That is why industrial transition strategy and transition finance sit at the center of Korea's long-term climate pathway. The focus is no longer only on facilities. It is on bankable transition plans that withstand global competition, supply chain pressures, and domestic cost realities. For hard-to-abate sectors, the direction of transition is already clear. Steel industry, shifting from blast furnaces to electric arc furnaces, and ultimately to hydrogen-based direct reduced iron. In the cement sector, it involves reducing the clinker content through alternative binders. And electrification and hydrogen-assisted processes in petrochemicals. Korea has aligned its 2035 NDC with expanded sectoral budgets. But public resources alone are insufficient. Public funds must crowd in private capital, especially because industrial electrification and fuel feedstock switching depend directly on power sector decarbonization and a reliable grid. However, three frictions occur simultaneously. First, high upfront technology costs. A single BF to EAF conversion can require around $684 million in capex. Secondly, uncertain post-transition profitability. Global buyers express ambition, but willingness to pay a stable green premium remains limited. Lastly, power price and grid risk. Industrial electricity tariffs rose around 70% from 2021 to 2024, and companies face first mover disadvantages. This is why policy and finance must narrow these penalties and credibly share risk. Without this, firms delay invest and national targets become unattainable. Over the past decade, global emission projections fell by 40%. That did not happen from pressure alone. It happened because in solar, wind, storage, and EVs, the green premium moved towards zero or negative. Clean options become cost competitive. The sequence was policy market signal, investment innovation, cost decline, and adoption. We must now replicate this for heavy industry. Coherent standards, credible offtake, investable projects, and transparent metrics so capital can price risk. Transition finance is at its core about engineering that cost-down pathway for hard-to-abate sectors. Green finance finances what is already green. Transition finance funds credible pathways where current activities are not yet green, but the firm has a science-based trajectory, strong governance, and transparent disclosure. Think of it as buying down the risk of industrial transformation so companies can move from pilots to low carbon still in the ground. Korea is moving toward a hybrid model, EU-style thresholds, Japanese-style transition planning and verification. Since 2021, Korea has laid initial groundwork through the K taxonomy and green bond rules. In 2024, transition finance became an official policy task, and the Ministry of Climate, Energy and Environment, together with financial regulators, aims to finalize guidelines in 2025 and apply them from 2026. The core stance is to maximize private capital mobilization. But because transition technologies rely directly on electricity prices, grid reliability, and the power mix, transition finance must be co-designed with power policy. Korea's issue not whether to transition, but how to transition fast enough, fairly enough to stay competitive. Transition finance can be the bridge from signals to steel, from pilots to pipelines, from individual facilities to cluster-level transformation. By bundling offtake, infrastructure, power supply, and finance, we can mobilize capital into verifiable, cost-lowering transition pathways. Our commitment is accuracy, fairness, and execution, delivered through open partnership across industry, finance, and regional actors. Korea's main bottleneck is system design, not lack of ideas. Right now, the core issue is that a few pieces of the system are still not fully in space. We don't yet have a clear, legally grounded definition of transition finance. And our sector roadmaps aren't detailed enough to support bankable KPIs. In addition, thin margins and power grid risks mean the incentives for companies are still too weak, and our performance system, from assessment and disclosure to assurance and verified emission data, remains incomplete. Closing these four gaps, definition, linkage, participation, and performance, is what turns plans into financeable pipelines. Our recommendations are built around 5 practical principles. First, we need to treat transition finance as a public purpose market. That means making it attractive for companies to participate while keeping verification tight with clear KPIs and independent assurance. Second, finance should go only to credible company-level transition plans that align with government-endorsed sector pathways and science-based trajectories. Third, we should legally anchor the transition segment of the K taxonomy, supported by independent assessment, so eligibility is clear and trust is built into the system. Fourth, power markets and climate markets must be integrated. In practice, that means linking PPAs, ETS price signals, and credit enhancement tools so companies have predictable economics when they invest. Finally, transition must happen at the cluster level, bringing together power supply, industrial processes, shared infrastructure, and finance as one package, rather than isolated projects. If designed well, transition finance isn't a subsidy. It's a competitive strategy for Korea's industrial future. Thank you.
Thank you, Jiwon. To complete our initial round of input, we now turn to the regional dimensions. The last speaker is Kang-deok Lee, mayor of Pohang City from South Korea, where steel making industry majority in Pohang City in Korea. He will speak about how transition finance can be designed to support regions, workers, and local communities. Due to his schedule conflict, he is attending via video. Please welcome Pohang City.
Distinguished delegates, I'm Lee Kang-deok, mayor of Pohang, Republic of Korea. Today, I stand before you to address the key green hope rising in our country steel. Pohang steel industry beyond the power plant. Pohang, Korea's city of steel, led its industrialization. Pohang is a leading city in southeastern Korea, with 490,000 residents, is a global hub of the steel industry, is hosted in Moscow at this school. Pohang's university industry cluster is building an innovation ecosystem across materials, energy, and green tech. Just 50 years ago, Pohang was driven by farming and fishing. The phase of steel started our industrial era and symbolized national pride. Pohang's economic growth came at an environmental cost. Pohang emits over 35 million tons of carbon emissions each year, nearly half of our country's total. The climate crisis is no longer distant. It is our reality. Across the world, climate regulation are reshaping industries. The Paris Agreement, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the EU CBAM demand fundamental change in the way we produce and trade. In this global context, Pohang seeks coexistence between industry and the environment. Now, I would like to share how Pohang is turning this vision into action. Since 2016, the Greenway project has turned Pohang from a gray industrial city into green and livable one. Through the Central Ocean and eco-greenways, all citizens can reach forests and rivers within 5 minutes. These greenways bring nature back to daily life and enhance the urban resilience and sustainability. Over 760,000 square meters of new green space equal to 107 football fields. Now absorb 88 tons of CO2 each year, advancing our climate goal. This achievement was recognized with the UN Habitat Asia Townscape Award and the Green Flag Award. Pohang is evolving beyond steel toward a sustainable industrial future. The Union Bay Complex, Korea's largest battery materials cluster combines resource recycling with green manufacturing. Hydrogen is now pillar of our energy strategy. We are building a full hydrogen value chain from production to utilization to attract 70 companies and achieve $740 million in revenue by 2035. And beyond that, we will become the world's leading hydrogen city. We are building a renewable energy hub, inclusive city and industry. Offshore wind and solar power our factories, and the local clean power zones use clean ammonia electricity made and used here. The steel industry stands at a critical turning point. The path we choose now will shape for its future. Steel is the backbone of our economy, supporting industries, daily life, and the national competitiveness. With this backbone connections, so does manufacturing itself. The steel industry faces an unprecedented crisis, slowing global demand. U.S. tariffs and tightening carbon rules all undermining competitiveness in production and export. Environmental regulations are inevitable. Without cutting carbon, no industry can compete globally. Yet, the transition is costly and technologically complex. We now stand at the crossroads between competitiveness and sustainability. To turn this crisis into opportunity, Huang has set out threefold strategy: industrial restructuring, carbon resource utilization, and low carbon technology development. Now, allow me to present Huang's sharing the vision for the future. We are turning aging, high carbon industrial zones into green energy hubs. First, we will be renewing all the industrial parks into smart green hubs. Smart manufacturing and energy self-sufficiency boost both competitiveness and sustainability. Next, our CCU mega project will capture and utilize 16,500 tons of CO2 each year generated from the steelmaking process. The captured CO2 will be converted into methanol and secondary battery materials, and will create a new eco-friendly industrial ecosystem that contributes to carbon reduction. Another innovation for Huang is hydrogen-based steelmaking. Post-hydrogen-based steelmaking technology, Hydrex uses hydrogen instead of carbon to produce oil. With near zero carbon emissions, it has the potential to become a game changer. The reality remains challenging. With high hydrogen and electricity costs, weak supply chains, and limited policy support, all hindering commercialization. Carbon neutrality is a global mission for survival. It calls for strong leadership from governments and bold innovations from global companies. At COP30 in Brazil, globally determined contributions complement national targets by mobilizing cities, industries, and local economies. In this context, today's discussion on transition finance is timely and essential. It's more than money, a level to transform high-emission industries and protect jobs, innovation, and communities. As a city whose economy is centered on the steel industry and consequently a major source of carbon emissions, can firmly believe the financial and the institutional state is essential for achieving carbon neutrality. I deeply resonate with the direction of today's discussion. I hope today's marks the beginning of a journey where Pohang and all of us here can shape a transition that truly leaves no one behind. Through carbon neutrality, Pohang will build a sustainable steel future, lighting the flame of a green steel city for the next century. Thank you.
Where the blue waves Pohang, a city of perfect harmony between history, culture, and contemporary appeal. A city where tradition meets innovation and the past grows alongside the future. Pohang's new challenge. Pohang, the center of the MICE industry, opening the door to a new era for the next century.
Okay. Thank you everyone for staying till in this hot temperature. Now we'd like to start panel discussion. And may I ask to please come up and take your seat at the front. Ms. Tulika Skinen, Annie Hitton, Shigetage Naoki, Thais Ferraz, Thomas Bello. I hope this is correct. The Ms. Tuli, over to you.
Dear friends, thank you very much for the very informative presentations we had, and a warm welcome to all our participants. I can tell you that I'm from Finland, and Finland has its pavilion a little bit that way, and we have a brand that was planned like before this COP, which says "cool by nature." And it's at least hot as it is here. So we have been thinking about what it actually means in these conditions. But great to be here, great to have you all here. And after these presentations, now the time is to have a little bit look at where are we with finance, with sustainable finance, with green finance, with transition finance. And to start with, I know all of you are actors who partner with the players in the field, with those who invest and plan to invest. And some of you do finance, and some of you do more policy, and some of you do possibly markets. Okay, let's do like this. This works as well. Thank you. But let's have a look at what's your role in this transition. What are you actually about to do? And what if we start from this end? So Shigetake Naoki, please, floor is yours. And if Annie can give the mic.
My name is Naoki Shigetake. I'm a COO of GX Acceleration Agency, in other words, GXA in Japan. I'm very glad. Thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. I would say Japan is, one of the first mover in the field of transition finance. But let me give you what's behind in it. So to explain that, I should explain, GX strategy of Japan. GX stands for Green Transformation, and which has two objectives. One is decarbonization. The second objective is to achieve economic growth through industrial competitiveness. And those two objectives are not either or, it's both. So, and the GX strategy, we should achieve both at the same time. And the GX strategy has two features. One feature is a balance between regulation and subsidization. In other words, carrot and stick. Because too much regulation would cause carbon leakage, too much subsidization cause probably inefficiency in the project and financial constraint. So the balance is very important. The second feature is emphasis on transition. In Hiroshima Summit, G7 Hiroshima Summit 2023, Japan proposed one goal, various pathways concept, which means we share as a world the one goal, which is a net zero. But the pathway, the route to go to the goal should depend on the situation of each country and the region, the industry structure or energy composition. So our agency, GXA, launched July last year to drive this GX strategy in a very balanced manner. So we have three functions. The first function is to provide financial support for private sector by taking the risks which private sector cannot take. And the second second role is introducing the Japan's first mandatory GX ETS system, carbon pricing system. The third objective is to provide strategic support. We call it GX hub functions. Because we proactively promote collaboration between companies, between private and public sectors. And then to finance this, Japan issued GX bond, which is first sovereign climate transition bond of 130 billion US dollar. By using this as a seed money, we call for the GX related investment of 1 trillion US dollar in next 10 years, both from public and private sectors. So we GXA support these activities by using transition finance.
Thank you so much. I think what Shikatake Naoki just told us describes very well what these kind of players are generally doing and how important they are in this field. Annie Heaton, Responsible Steel, and your role in sustainable finance.
Thank you, Julie. And thank you to the Climate Centre for this panel. We can take a global look at transition finance, but we also have to remember as you say, the individual circumstances of different players. But when you're looking at transition finance, you're looking at a project for transformation, for transition, and if you're investing in that, you want to know what is the outcome, what is the products that come from that project. Now, I work in steel, and in steel, you will hear many people say, oh, there's no definition of what is low emission steel, what is near zero steel. That's not quite true, but let's just stay with that for a minute, because why is that important? Because an investor in a steel project wants to know that the products coming from this big investment, and these investments are billions of dollars, will be attractive in the future market in which we will be wanting low emissions products. And therefore you need some standards to define what is low emissions, what is near zero. So in fact there are multiple definitions. Responsible Steel back in 2022 published our international production standard, which defined a global system for this definition. Responsible Steel, for those of you who don't know, we are a global, multi-stakeholder, international standards and certification system. So we oversee the audits, the assurance, so that the data that is certified is credible. And we're not just about greenhouse gases, we're also about 13 principles of sustainability. So if you are Responsible Steel certified, it's demonstration that you are managing well your environmental systems and your impact. You're managing well your social systems and your governance. And I heard the previous speakers reference all of those things when they're thinking about transition finance. An investor wants to know that you're well governed. An investor wants to know that you've got a good pathway of transition that's looking across the whole spectrum. So Responsible Steel as a standard system offers a tool that financiers can use to consider how the company is managing their risk. And I think that's the lens to see the standard from and the certification. So we run a finance working group, and we work with banks and steel makers and civil society to consider what are the good ways to de-risk? So partly it's about certification, and partly it's about evolving our standards to ensure that it meets the needs of investors. So that's in a nutshell how we link to transition finance.
Perfect. And these toolboxes are definitely needed. I work a lot with the Nordic steel makers, and they very clearly see these challenges you just described. Thank you very much. Thijs Ferras is a program director from the Institute for Climate and Society. And if I understood correctly, you have this kind of philanthropic role in this field. But please tell us more.
Yeah, thank you. So we are a Brazilian organization, a regional climate foundation, and we work as a regranter, but we work as a convener and agenda setter too in Brazil, connecting Brazil with global agendas, and bringing some of the perspective from the Brazilian situation. Here we have a very specific context because our energy mix is around more than 50% comes from renewable sources. So of course hydropower is important, but we are growing a lot our capacity on solar and wind power, and our electricity mix is more than 90% comes from renewables, which means that we have here a very unique situation, and we are now working in some studies with several organizations that shows that reallocating, for example, the production of some energy-intensive materials to region with clean and competitive energy can reduce costs by 18% to 38%, depending on the sector. This is the thesis of power shoring that we have been working a lot. And for example, for the steel sector, we have just let me check. Yeah, the steel sector that accounts for 11% of the global, emission, represents a major development opportunity. So exporting 10 million tons of green iron could generate more than 7,000 permanent jobs and 2.3 billion in revenues. And in a Brazilian context, it is very interesting because we have a huge capacity installed in the northeast of the country, where we need to generate local development. So the governors and the subnational level is very interested in this thesis, but of course we need to create some financial instruments. So we are working with several banks, with multilateral banks and some national development and the National Development Bank and other commercial banks to create a taxonomy for power shoring. I think that this is the first thing that we need to do, aligning all the criteria and the standards, and then creating the financial instruments, because we still need a blended finance, to accelerate this industry. But we have the engaging of different states in the region, and we are promoting this kind of partnership with the several grantees and partners that we have.
Perfect, thank you so much. And then Thomas Below, you are director from the UNDP Sustainable Finance Hub, and you support finance players on both ends, if I have understood correctly. But Thomas, tell us more. It might be working. Yes, it is. Please.
It's working, yes. I hope my brain is working. I don't think it ever does, to be honest. I just wanted, first of all, what an amazing panel. This one and the previous presentations have been amazing. And I wanted to sort of take a step back. I think we've got the examples, the tools, the guidance, the private sector initiatives. The question I have we got the narrative? And I think you've just shown how in Brazil it's possible to win the narrative on the benefits of the transition. I think globally, actually UNDP has just released a report with the OECD called investing in climate, investing in growth and development, because we're trying to change the narrative towards a narrative which shows actually investing in climate, investing in transition is investing in growth and development. It's not just about being hard to abate, it's about being an opportunity to grow. Now, I think at a national level, UNDP works across 170 different countries. So we have offices in all of those countries. The narratives are sometimes being won for a transition and sometimes they're being lost on the transition. But the sort of guidance, the sort of examples that we're hearing today, the tools, the more granular they get, the more sector specific they get, the more robust our national narratives will become. So I just wanted to sort of take I think we've heard a lot of facts and figures and examples, but I really think the narrative is something that we need to focus on as well.
Perfect, thank you. About the narrative, actually, I would like to continue with you a little bit because in the presentations, I think at least two speakers said that we actually don't have a definition for transition. Like we all have our own thinking of what transition is. And of course, talking about transition finance is a little bit challenging if we don't concentrate on that. So what would be your definition for transition?
Well, I think it's difficult to have universal definitions to words that themselves are ambiguous. So I'm not sure that we need to pursue a universal definition. What I think we need to do is build this up from the bottom to the top. And I think we're seeing that. And I just wanted to give one example, and it's actually a couple of words that I've heard a lot during the last few days, and it's about country platforms. And I really believe we should all be paying attention to this. And again, Brazil has got some nice examples of this. It's not just because I'm sitting next to you that I'm saying that. But country platforms I see as having four really important levels which help us again build our narrative. One is obviously about policy. And all of this conference is about, in many ways, raising the ambition of our policy around the nationally determined contributions. Now, we need to ensure that transition is in those NDCs. And we need to ensure that sector-specific policy measures are in those NDCs. We need to build policy frameworks that are credible and robust, that survive political change. The second area of country platforms that are really important are the pipelines. And I think we're hearing a bit about some of the examples of how to build bankable projects in hard-to-abate sectors. But we actually need bankable projects across sectors, and that sector specificity is important again. And the third aspect of country platforms is financial de-risking, and I think, again, we're hearing a lot about that from the panel. It's a lot of sort of sexy talk, if I could spice it up a bit, about things like guarantees, as if these are new instruments. But it's also about boring old instruments, and I hope there's nobody from the insurance industry here, but insurance is such a core part of transition. So it's about de-risking using different instruments. And finally, and this is ultimately, and you can stop me straight after this, but I must say this, the most important part is impact management and measurement. Because the whole credibility of this venture is that it benefits people and planet. And if we can't demonstrate that with authenticity in every country that's trying to take this forward, then I'm afraid our local, national, global narratives will not be credible.
Thank you so much. I think actually this last definition is something quite tangible. So transition is something that creates impact for people and planet, which means emission reductions or removals, and through that different kind of other perspectives. How about the others? Would you like to? What's your definition for transition, and what do we need to take into account when we discuss about that? Who would like to start? Please, it's open.
So as I said, transition. It's one goal pathway, one goal various pathways, right? So as Thomas said, transition must be the country or region specific or even industry specific. But having said that, for Japan, the narrative is GX, because GX stands for green transformation. And green transformation, GX, is not well, recognized in outside Japan, because probably the English equivalent is green transition is much more, easier to understand. But the Japanese government insisted to call it green transformation and coined GX as a term, because it showed the Japanese government's commitment to achieve green transformation through socio-economic transformation, not only energy, not only decarbonization. So that is the narrative, and that is the definition of Japan.
Thank you. Annie Heaton, would you like to continue?
Yeah, thanks. Look, transition happens at the corporate level, and that's what the banks are interested in. But actually, the transition happens at a project level. So I think we have to marry these two. And as I say, when you are thinking about the company's output and its financial success is based on the products that it sells. So I think you have to weave in the product and the impact of the product into the definition. But transition in itself is uncertain, and it's not necessarily, I think we're really beginning to acknowledge that at this COP. It's not going to happen in a day, right? It's going to happen in steps. And the responsible steel approach to this was, when we created our standard, was to not define what is green steel, but define levels of transition. And we call it decarbonization progress, so that the company is rewarded for each stage of progress that it makes. If it wants to go to near zero tomorrow, I think that will get a very, very good response from the market. But there are other plants, other steelmaking producers around the world that have older technology that will have to do it in steps. And you have a lot of new blast furnaces, by the way, in Southeast Asia, for example, and now in India. And they have a 30-year lifespan or potentially longer. I mean, in Europe, we have 100 years old steel plants. So they're going to have to take it step by step and incorporate investments. So they need reward for each step of the way. So I think we want to aim for a transformation for new projects, but for old projects and plants, we need to look at transitional steps. And we can do the both. Now, the other thing I think I've noticed in the last year is that when we look at the company level, we're wanting to see how the company aligns with a pathway for the sector. The companies are not meeting those pathways anymore, and that's becoming abundantly clear. So what do you do as an investor if the company is off track? And I think that's the real challenge that we have, is to think of milestones that we can find to de-risk the company. And it's probably, those milestones are made up of a series of projects. So investment in projects that are going through those transitional stages. But I would add to that, we all know that the absolutely key to the transition is policies. So I think that both investors and steelmakers actually have a real role to play here. So part of their transition plan should incorporate what is their involvement to influence policy so that they can decarbonize. And I think transparency around that will drive more momentum. So it's quite a complex set of tools, but we need to think at company level and at project level. And to your point, the impact is everything.
Thank you. And Thais Ferraz, please.
I think that the integration between different policies, I think that we will only have the change and the transition if we have an approach together, it is not just a climate change matter, but it is a new pattern of economic development, and we should consider the climate change with others, criterias that we take in place to take a decision, For now, if we need to decide if we will have, a production in a place or in another place, we will analyze the cost and a lot of factors. We should analyze climate change too. But for this, we need, like a global framework. But in a more domestic level, we have several instruments in Brazil. And I think that the challenge is the integration between those different, policies and instruments and financial incentives, because in some way they are all aligned with the NDC. But we should think about the financial perspective too. So we should consider in the NDC what and how we will finance the NDC. This is a challenge for us. So we have several instruments, and like a blended finance instruments, the Brazilian the taxonomy, the Brazilian investment platform, and others. But the integration between them, we are still working on it, and this is very important. Otherwise, we will have some different policies and instruments, and we will not be able to achieve the goals that we need.
Thank you so much. Hey, let's come to this and Shikatage Nagi. Annie referred to the question, what do we do if the companies do not meet the goals? They don't meet the parts, the emission reduction plans they made. And suddenly we are in a situation that there is green bond or there is some other type of financing tools in place and the goals are not met. As a financing body, what's your way to work with these companies in these kind of situations? Annie, if you can.
I think the quick answer is blended finance, because to make transition finance more effective, particularly in hard-to-abate sector, blended finance is a must, given the current situation where due to inflation, costs increased, and some transition project of hard-to-abate sector becomes economically unviable without support. So blended finance is very important.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And that I think is the core, that there are different type of plans. Annie, can you still build on that? Like, what would you expect from the finance sector player to do when these roadmaps are not met?
Well, I think the finance sector in itself is really grappling with this. There are several frameworks out there now for transition finance, and we are working with the banks actually to ask the steelmakers for the data which enables them to track. So investors 10 years ago thought that they had no role in anything but finance. What I'm seeing is that investors now understand that they have to play more of a role in actually supporting, trying to create the supporting mechanisms, not just in finance, but also to work with governments on policy. And in the development finance world, we see that happening much more. So we work, for example, with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the International Finance Corporation, and there you're seeing some connections because these multilaterals have good relations with the governments between the finance and the policy, and I think that's really, really critical.
Thank you so much. And from our own membership base, I can say that for banks, Nordic banks, there is this question marks. Like if this was the path, and now it looks like that the whole society is getting a little bit is back with a plan. Actually, there is a gap that needs to be bridged somehow. It's not possible in the end to the banks to say that, hey, okay, then we don't act at all, but there needs to be this support for the transition. But hey, we got a nice example from Korea and heard about Korean plans, but there were one interesting slide explaining the challenges for Korean sustainable finance. And Thomas, I would like you to comment a little bit. There was technology cost, there was profitability uncertainty, and grid constraints were the three areas in the slide. Are those the big questions also globally that are challenging sustainable finance field and typically challenges for the actors? Please. Yes, now it's working.
I'm incompetent, thank you very much. those definitely are challenges. I don't think they're the only challenges. I mean, we could have a long list of challenges. And I did just want to come back to the point of incentives and disincentives, because I don't think any of this makes any sense if there are not the appropriate incentives and disincentives to take action. I mean, otherwise, really, it's just talk and it's just paper. And I do think we are seeing countries and regions put in place those incentives and disincentives. Perhaps one of the greatest challenges is, I think we heard the word interoperability before. I mean, from a developing country perspective, and UNDP is primarily concerned with the developing country perspective, some of the regions and economies with the toughest regulation and the toughest disincentives and the best incentives, those markets are becoming impenetrable to other economies who don't have the capacities to live up to those regulatory measures. And I think we're at a moment where we're seeing disruption across markets, which is really a result of that. I won't mention the word tariffs. Whoops, I did. That's caught up in the whole conundrum of how we ease access to markets for all economies. And I actually think that is the greatest challenge we face in the transition.
Perfect. I think Annie wanted to continue. Please.
No, thank you. I'm glad you mentioned the T word, because tariffs have nothing to do with climate, right? It's about protecting one's industry. It's about the political relations between the countries. But we find ourselves, and I've heard a lot about this in discussions both here and elsewhere. We're facing the CBAM with Europe, and that's not a tariff. That's a climate measure.
Absolutely,
to create
it's not
level
a
playing
tariff.
field, right? But we also then have this new 50% tariff and reduced quotas. So from a developing country perspective, if you're Moranti Green Steel and you're investing in a new green steel plant and you don't think you're going to be able to export, you've got a real issue. So it seems like to me that there's a perfect opportunity when the European Commission or any other country is negotiating their tariffs to look bilaterally with countries and perhaps multilaterally. I would love to see governments committing to removing tariffs for very low emissions steel. Now, who am I to say that? I represent a standards organization. But why am I interested in that? Because there is a global framework of standards that can provide the tools for governments to negotiate this. And just this morning, Responsible Steel announced cooperation with 2 regional steel standards and certification bodies, both in Europe and in China. Together we represent 60% of the world's steel production. To interoperate, to your point, to interoperate our systems so that a policymaker in Europe can speak to a steelmaker in China, or a policymaker in China can speak to a steelmaker in Indonesia, right? And don't forget that it's not just Europe that's going to be imposing a CBAM in the years to come. So we need this multilateral system, and we need this interoperable system so that everybody can actually speak the same language, classify what good looks like and what they want in a harmonized way. And I think we're doing our best to contribute to that and create that interoperability.
Thank you. Very good example also. And the question related to CBAM is so drastic. For us Europeans, we are kind of happy and proud that we have been able to develop something like that. And then at the same time, we understand quite fully that it creates quite big challenges for some others. And it also puts Europeans a little bit like in the role that is not probably the best one to be in this collaborative kind of atmosphere. So that's a very good example. What about the challenges of sustainable finance? Shigetake Naoki, please.
Hi. Hearing what Yuon-san said, I think, the Korean transition finance is very well designed in terms of what to do of transition finance. So the challenges you just mentioned is the challenge of how to do. Then I think again the keyword is blended finance. So I give you an example of to make the blended finance effective, you need to think about the end-to-end support, which means the supply chain end-to-end. For example, if you think about green steel, we provide a subsidization for upstream, for electric furnace or something like that. For downstream, we offer subsidization for EV users, EV buyers, because oftentimes, hard-to-abate sector, the challenge is to create demand and supply at the same time. So those two do not exist currently. So we need to make sure that the subsidization support goes to end to take off the supply chain at once.
Thank you. That described it well, and yes, good that we also got this feedback of the Korean system. Hey, if there is any question from the audience, anything you would like to ask or comment or add to what has been discussed here, please raise your hand. Now it's time for questions or comments. If not at this stage, I think we take our final round around the question of who are in the need of the financial transition finance, especially like we saw from the IEA analysis that it's about half and half to advanced economics and emerging and developing economies. That's one question. Then there is this question of the different kind of sectors. It's hard-to-abate sectors or the ones that need to transform heavily. But then there is also agriculture. In a previous panel, there was nice discussion from the perspective of Brazilian farmers and their needs. So the question of to who do we need to make sure that the transition finance is in place? And also you can tell from your own perspective, who are you especially supporting? If we start from Thais Ferraz, please.
Yeah, I think as we saw in the report from IEA, in the case of the emergent countries, I think that the risks are adding one to each other. So this is the big challenge, because a lot of times there is a risk of investment, the country risk, and then you have a new industry and you are not so sure about the demand, so it is harder to get the investors for the supply. So this is the thing. But if we could guarantee the demand for those products, it would be so much easier, For example, the case of steel and all the tariffs now, they were like, there was an uncertainty here, and it was terrible because this is very bad for the emergent countries. So I think if we could have a guarantee of takers or some bigger agreements, I think it would provide the development of the technology, and the financial sector would be more secure to come. And that's maybe now this is the role of the blended finance or multilateral banks. So this is how I see.
Perfect. Thomas, those who are in the need of transition finance from UNDP perspective.
Well, I think we're all in need of transition finance is the simple answer to the question, and it's different sources for different contexts, and that's very much the debate here. The Baku to Belém roadmap, all sources, all contexts need them, but in different ways. But if this is the closing round, I just wanted to say I think what we need more than anything is collaborative disruption. It's not just about the finance, it's about the partnerships that develop around the transactions and around those financial flows. If we can sustain those partnerships, then we can sustain a transition. If we only focus on the finance and the transactions, then we have no chance.
Perfect. Then here, Shigetake Naoki.
Okay. So for me, it's not a region or industry, but the first movers. I would say first movers need transition finance. I'm thinking of hard to abate sectors. Those who taking a risk, they move fast. First mover is always taking a risk, so they need a transition finance, particularly in combination with the private and public sector money.
And I think it was quite well said also that it's first movers, but it's also first movers as consumers. I think Nicholas Stern, the famous climate economist, said, I think already 2 years ago, that we have found ways to finance this institutional transition or industrial transition, but we didn't find a way to finance the needs of real people and families. Like when you need to change your car, you need to find a new type of stove or whatever is the need. It's actually something that costs for families and for people, and there we also need finance. But Annie.
Thanks so much, Tuli, for bringing in the people aspect to this, because if we think about who needs the transition finance, it's the people, right? Whether it's about having clean jobs or jobs in the clean economy, or whether it's about transitioning away from dirty industry. And that means that there are two different kinds of transition finance. There's transition to and transition away. And yes, we absolutely need to provide the means to enable the finance for developing and emerging economies so that they're not building new blast furnaces. So they're able to build a new technology. And nowhere is that more evident than in India, the fastest growing steel economy in the world, which is doubling or maybe tripling by 2030 its steel capacity. Because then we're locked in. But equally, you see how much in Pohang and in Europe, the existing industries are so reticent to move away from the old technology because there are so many things that are contingent on that, not least the well-being of the local economy. So there needs to be you talked about collaboration, a much broader approach to transition finance in developed economies, so that you're looking beyond the steel plant. The supply chain usually will involve 3 or 4 times the number of workers than in the actual steel plant, just in the local vicinity. And then I think the final thing to say is when we're looking at transition away and transition to, there's a lot of potential for partnerships and collaboration between economies. Europe knows that it's going to get its iron in the future, not from Europe, but from economies with high degree of renewable energy. So people are talking about green iron corridors. That is a perfect opportunity for collaboration, and it's collaboration on skills, on the social side, as well as on the technology and the finance side. So I think we've always got to blend these things together, and that is why responsible steel is not just a greenhouse gas standard. We consider the whole thing, and that's really important.
Hey, thank you so much. I think we have had very, very nice discussion about transition and sustainable finance. It's clear that we need new narrative. We have to be able to explain what we are doing. It's clear that there are actually quite many different kind of actors who would need some more financing to be able to go over this transition. And it's clear that there are actually quite many mechanisms to do that. Some scale is needed, and hopefully also this COP30 will be one of the places to put that in place. Thank you so much for all our panelists, and thank you very much for organizers of this event for having us. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very insightful. Panel discussion. Before we close, can we take photo if you don't mind? Thank you very much.